Do you see breaks as a valuable part of your training, or is training always work and the only break is at the end of the session when you've finished? Are you aware of the benefits in both movement and emotional regulation that occur in a break? Recognizing when training is difficult for the horse physically or emotionally is very important for the horse to build a feeling of safety and trust.
So today we're going to talk about the value and the importance of a brain break, and this having of a pause during your session, after repetitions, after exercises, because it's really underestimated and the changes are often remarkable.
Yeah, it's so amazing. What stimulated us to do this podcast today is that I ran a clinic last weekend, and the brain breaks was a really important part of the clinic. And it was so interesting to see the changes in the horses when we gave them time to process that information. And it was different, like the breaks were different for the individual horses depending on, what they were doing, where they were at, how intensely they were kind of focused on the exercise, and also what they liked, because you don't want the break to be stressful in itself, because that's going to kind of undermine what you're doing. But yeah, it's one of the most kind of valuable things that we can learn in horse training is that progress just doesn't have to happen during the doing, that it also happens in the pause. And I think Dr. Stephen Peters, he's an equine neuroscientist, and if you've had a chance to listen to him on any podcasts and read his books, he really talks about the importance of those breaks, and that it's time that you give the horse time to process and regulate, release tension, and integrate what they've just experienced. So what would you say about those breaks?
They can look like a lot of different things. It's quite a diverse way of giving them a little bit of time off. Sometimes it just looks like taking a moment in the middle of a session and you're just going to stand quietly and breathe yourself. Sometimes it looks like allowing the horse to just stretch and look around. They might want to do a slow wandering on a loose rein or a long line. The thing is, I had this in a session yesterday, actually. I was with someone and we were talking about wanting to create a softness through the head and neck. And I was just saying, could you just go for a really soft walk around back and forth? And the horse was kind of like, oh, I would like to drop into that state. I would like to soften. But it was the small moment of someone being like, okay, we're about to turn, and then being like, turn with me, rather than taking the time to be like, I'm going to initiate the slightest of movement and see if you'll kind of come with me, and then see if you want to keep going. I'm just going to follow you because this is your brain break and I'm not looking to influence what you're doing. I'm going to give you a true slow wander on a loose rein or a long line. And so in that moment, the horse doesn't have to be thinking about, what do I need to do to respond to the pressure that's being placed upon me with the halter or something like that. So it's a true brain break where we're not asking anything of them, even in the small ways. So it's quite a conscious decision to be like, I'm not placing any expectation. I can follow you as well, because if you want to go and then I say no, you're immediately in that position of like, well, I'm not actually having a break. I'm still on duty. I'm still checked in. So another example can be grazing for a moment. There are definitely times horses are avoiding for having a graze, but sometimes, so I find this a lot with the foals, they'll do this thing where they want to graze, but they kind of keep me in their vision out the side of their eye. And then as long as I just stand back, and sometimes I actually move further away because they need more space to evaluate, that little break, sometimes if they just need to go away and chew, and then they'll come back and be like, thanks, I just needed a timeout. I need to do something else. Or even simply just having a little nibble and being like, I am hungry for a moment. I'm going to do something else. And I get to enjoy this part of the training, which means that I'm not longing for it, which means that I can come back and enjoy time with you. So it can be quite dynamic. You've also just got the stock standard pause between an exercise. It's good to just stand and wait with your horse. Sometimes that in itself becomes a bit of an exercise. You're just chilling and, giving them time to observe the environment as well. So, and there's lots of different benefits. We're going to go into them, but one, just from giving them time to observe, they have understood now that giving your horse on average, it takes about 13 seconds when they decide to look off in the distance and they're like, oh, I'm interested in such and such. If you can be like, yep, you can have that brain break to focus on what you need to. It takes them on average about 13 seconds to come back to you after they've made an evaluation. So it's still habituation most of the time when you give that break. They're just learning about the environment and coming back to you. So it's good for horses. And sometimes the most productive thing you can do after good effort is pause. Actually, I'd say it is probably the most productive thing that you can do. So, allowing them to explore and have free time in the area. So those are all kind of passive ways of thinking about a brain break. What are some active brain breaks that you would consider or use with your own horses?
Yeah, so what we had on the weekend was we had the corner with a mat, some treats, some pool noodles, some cones, and there was a couple of different areas we sat with a couple of boxes. Like, you can be a bit inventive. You don't want the horse to be scared of the area though, so it's got to be a comfortable thing to do to explore that. So you don't want to put things there that are scary to the horse. You want to put things there that are initially very comfortable for the horse and easy for them to explore. And so you're giving them a chance to just utilize their brain, utilize all of their senses. So they're utilizing their vision, their smell, their vibrissae, which are like their whiskers. Sometimes they're utilizing their feet, because they'll paw and feel it with their feet. And so they're getting feedback through different senses to when you're asking them to focus and concentrate. And they're also just being able to explore and utilize curiosity in those moments as well. So you could also have a drum where you've got some treats on top of the drum. And, we've seen some pretty amazing changes in horses in our online course. When we've, people have been struggling. It could be that the horse is physically struggling with the exercises. They've got a lot of stuff going on physically. And so when they're doing any physical stuff, it is just hard work. And with that horse, she created he didn't like going in the arena, and so she took him at liberty into the arena, put the treats around on drums and in different places, and let him just explore. He was holding himself in better posture, and he also, I think, started to have some trotting after her, and it became quite fun. And then he changed his willingness to participate in the exercises that were harder. Then we had another lady in the course whose horse was just completely distracted all the time, and that she would struggle to do the exercises because the horse was a little bit explosive. It was winter, the horse was locked up a lot. And so instead of just going out and working, she actually let the horse have an exploration time before. But instead of just letting the horse run around and be stupid, she set it all up so the horse would have something to go and look at. And so that stopped the stupid running, allowed the horse to, become centered. And then when she went to work with the horse, she was way more connected, trying. She couldn't believe the difference that it made, allowing that horse 5 minutes before the session to just explore and use her senses.
Yeah.
So, like, they're just a couple of examples. I also saw some big changes on the weekend where one of the horses, he was like really like on a mission. And, we just kind of breathed and brought his awareness kind of back into the space. And then he was really quite focused on how he was moving and stuff. And then I said, okay, free time, like just let him walk where he wants to walk. He like did it. Like the thing is that it's not allowing them to be pushy or bossy. So like the horse is still not allowed to just pull you wherever they want. They've still got to be polite in that interaction, but you become like the follower. And so we followed him. He went over to the gate and he like looked out there. Then he went over to like the little brain area. He hadn't explored there. Then he just started sniffing the ground like, oh, I didn't notice this surface before. Like, oh, there's like felt in this surface. And they said like they just never see him do that. He just never takes a moment, out of his like work to just chill out. And then we had the other horse who we allowed to turn away from the poles, who would not acknowledge the poles. We allowed her to turn away 3 times, and then we did not make her go over the pole. And then she came back in, and she took her owner, this was in the next session after lunch, took her owner over all the poles. Just led her owner over. So through giving her, like through allowing her some choice and also recognizing that stepping over the poles was a thing for her, it like enabled her to be more connected and curious, where she came in and wanted to explore that. So yeah, and then we had the school horse. We played some marker training with him for 5 minutes at Liberty in the round yard. And then when he came back into the arena, he was just kind of like, oh, what are we doing? Instead of being like, oh, arena, this is so boring. So like it's very cool how it changes their involvement.
Definitely. And just to go back to the, those are active. They're kind of like meeting a need that the horse has before they, like the horse who's like, yep, I need to do a lot of stimulation. I did have a foal once who was a super playful colt, but he would come in and just be like, I just want to eat you and I just want to lean and play. And I found that if I presented him with like 15 different things, like here, smell the cracker packet, here's the flag moving on the ground, to play with all these different things for a few seconds that he could inspect. It was almost like he was satiated. I've met his need. And then he was just like
to like explore.
Yeah, it's almost, like he really needed that to be able to be like, I've had my fill of what I needed and now I'm here to engage with you, and how wonderful to learn something. And I just was thinking of the pauses. I was talking about, the times that we have a small pause, like 13 seconds, etc. But 2 days ago, I had an experience with a foal has been super, super, super sensitive with their legs, to the point where for so many days I'm doing like very small amounts of habituation, but we'd hit almost a perfect storm of good weather. He was relaxed. There's no crazy cows running around, which he'd had. And all of his friends were standing quite close to the pen, and he allowed me to do like some really soft touches all the way down his leg, to the point where I could just really gently hold the hoof. And he went into this super deep processing state. I have a video of it on my phone. It's going for like 10 minutes. And so he went into this really deep state of like blinking, and then he'd have like a momentary, like he's practically asleep in front of me, like ears back and then relax them, and then ears back and relax, soft blink, twitching head, 10 minutes of this, and totally switched off to anything. And then at the end, he had this huge, big stretch where he lifted up and curled his neck and stretched a leg out the back and does a big yawn. And then he just woke up, looked at me, and came straight over and pressed his head on my chest like, okay, I'm ready. And then he just tuned back in for the rest of the session. And so a long time ago, what I would have done is, when I was like, okay, I need to be learning this in a session, I would sometimes, especially with young horses, and I think because they are undeveloped nervous systems and They obviously need more sleep as well than older horses, and they just have a lower attention span. They would get to the point of being sleepy, and then I would still be like, nope, you have to move, and you have to do this. But my results 10x'd when I was like, you can just process that for as long as you need to. And then when you come back, you will just know how to do it. They're just, and sometimes I do one repetition, they go super sleepy. I let them go for the day. They come back tomorrow and they know from one repetition. So
Yeah.
you can look sometimes like being quite patient and having to spend the time to just wait it out. And I really believe that waiting it out is worth it nearly all of the time.
Yeah.
And 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 yeah, they're really, really valuable. So if we think about the nervous system regulation, and you're coming from a learning perspective, why brain breaks are so important. One thing is that horses can't learn efficiently when they're stuck in a high sympathetic arousal. So that's fight, flight, brace, survival. And that's because we want to stay within the horse's window of tolerance, because that is their optimal place of learning without overwhelm. So in that space, they can remain engaged in the training and the environment, and they're able to problem solve while staying emotionally balanced. And so in that window of tolerance, the idea is that if you push them over the threshold, then they have to go into a fight or a flight or something else. But when we're within their window, that's the opportunity where they are able to consider the environment. Too cute. No. So brain breaks, they help when we're trying to stay within this window of tolerance. In this instance, we want to utilize brain breaks so that we can shift towards a more regulated state. So it's kind of what you were saying before with the horses that you've seen in clinic. And what those horses will have demonstrated at the time is they usually have an improvement in their breathing. So they're kind of like their breathing rate will slow and they'll start to use their whole body. And their muscular tension reduces as they go into a slightly less sympathetic state. And that in turn comes to a softening of the posture. Their curiosity can return and learning becomes possible. And so I also think there's, if we're linking this back to posture, what happens when you come back to a more parasympathetic state is that when you are allowed to focus on yourself, like you have a break, when we think about our postural training, a lot of it is a time when we're trying to create a conscious change in the horse so that the horse can begin to manage the horse rather than us managing the horse. But sometimes when we rely on being the one to orchestrate the horse, so we say, you step this way, this much, this high, now you step backwards this much, this way, this high, then the horse is externally focused on us. And so they're not really thinking about what feels good to me. How do I come back into myself and feel my body and say, okay, yes, that did feel good. Or I'm being asked to manage my own posture to stay in, like, if you think back, if the horse can think to their own body and say, okay, this feels good to me to be able to drop back to a trot when the canter is unbalanced. If you want a horse who's able to do that, you need a horse who can already regulate and knows that you are going to give them the opportunity to be able to do that. And brain breaks are one time when you can reinforce that them thinking about their own body and prioritizing how they feel is a good thing to do. So it's also a tool in building posture and giving the putting the power back in their hands, I guess. So if you were watching a horse during a physical or their physical signs during a good brain break, what is something that you might see?
Yeah, like often you'll see, like you said, a change in breathing. They might do some licking and chewing. They might have little involuntary movements within their body as well, like little head kind of twitches. They might scratch themselves and then just kind of go back to looking sleepy. They may lick and chew, soften the eye. move around, change their posture a little bit, but they're kind of internally focused rather than externally focused. And it also happened to me the other day with Ellie. So she loves the bridge. It's like her favourite little spot. And so sometimes she races me to the bridge and I have to like catch her before. I'm like, no, we're going to work a bit longer today. But she caught me off guard and she was adamant about, no, I'm standing on the bridge. And I had an agenda, I was like, no, we need to work with your posture, we need to like do all this other stuff. And then I thought, what would I tell a client to do in this situation? I would tell them to just wait and see what actually happens. So I let her stay. She had her front legs up on the bridge. And then she stretched, like she moved her feet so that her heels were hanging off the bridge. And we just kind of did some changes with her foot balance recently. And so I was like, oh, and she was being a little bit lame in the front. And I was like, that's interesting. And so then she stood there like stretching her heels down. Then she like did some stretches, head down, rubbing her legs, turning her head to one side, go back to sleep, twitch, head, change. Oh, and also at the start she kept picking up her front legs and swapping her weight, shifting between her front legs. And I was like, is that flies or not? And it wasn't flies because she stopped doing it. Like it was an obvious weight shift. And then she moved her bum into different positions. And then, she turned her head, have a big scratch and a stretch. She just stood there. It was 20 minutes. And then she kind of came back aware of her environment. And I thought, I'm just going to take the head collar off now and leave her there. And, she stayed there for a little bit longer and then got off and walked away. But I was like, okay, well, the next day I thought I'll see if that was actually beneficial. Because if it was beneficial and it meant something to her system, I should see a difference somewhere in her. Well, there was a big difference. So the difference was that when I did her activations, they were more connected. She had the best connection from her pelvis to her back that she's had. Her lower neck started to connect in better with the activations. She also was way happier to trot. She was less lame. She was striding out better. After the session, she was exploring the dam bank in different ways because I left her out there. She trotted over for her dinner, which she only does when she's super happy and comfortable. And there was something else that she did that I was like, that was massive. I got the best tail activations that she's ever done. And then I took her back at the end of the session. I said, okay, bridge time for reward. She just hopped on the bridge. She walked over the bridge. She ate some grass. There was no interest in standing on the bridge again like she did the day before. So, sometimes it's really difficult to pause, especially when it's 20 minutes, half an hour. But every time that I have done that with a horse, I have seen massive changes in, movement, behavior, relaxation, nervous system regulation, emotional regulation. There's always been an obvious change in the next session, in their willingness to do a certain exercise, or maybe it was the exercise that I was doing where they just went into sleepy mode. I've had it happen when I've been riding, where, I was lifting up the reins, and every time I lift up the reins, there was brace. So I just decided to sit, lift the reins, drop the reins, lift the reins, drop the reins. And she went into a really relaxed state, was completely not there. until I could lift the reins and nothing happened, and I got off. That was all I did for that session. I abandoned all other plans. Then the next day, it took twice for me to lift the reins and put them down, no brace, and it never, ever went back to the same amount of brace again. Like, it had changed that pathway permanently because I'd given her nervous system time to release the old pathway. So whether it's physical, mental, emotional, trauma, it always blows me away what happens if we're willing to just wait and see.
Awesome. So if you are, you're talking about, it's a deep learning really that's happening in that time. And that is especially important when you're introducing movement, new movements, postural exercises. You've talked about obstacles with Ellie, all of these things.
Yeah.
They're a form of consolidation of learning. And so rehab work, when we're asking the horse to really take something on and change, it's conscious, deep level nervous system change. We have ridden concepts that can be, I think it's easy sometimes to doubt. We already know what we want. We already know what we expect the limb to do. And there are times when the horse definitely understands us and our relationship works, but they are learning it as we tell them. They don't have any previous understanding or thoughts or time to think about it. So other things like balance and coordination tasks, all of these need memory consolidation. And so these moments of pause allow for memory consolidations. And these are new neural pathways. So they actually have to grow inside the brain. And they also have to, these connections become stronger in the body as well. So the priming of these reactions or these ways of being happen in our muscles, they happen in our nervous system, and they happen in our brain. And so sleep, again, is a very big part of a brain break. And so REM sleep, we actually did an episode recently on sleep, and so listening to that would be very useful in understanding how sleep is necessary for us to consolidate things in the brain. So the other part of that is that if we continuously repeat an exercise without giving time to process, we reduce the effectiveness and reduce the value of the exercise. And then we end up in frustration and mental fatigue. And so, for me, one thing that I learned years ago that I was very impressed by is the fact that all of those pathways in the brain that we're building, these new neural pathways, they do need energy and they need oxygen. And so they actually have their own circulation inside the brain. And when we exhaust those neural pathways, because they're not really fast, really well-fed pathways, they actually fatigue literally as if they were a muscle. And so we need to conserve the amount of times that we do things to make sure that we don't overload the system or take ourselves backwards, which I've definitely done when I've asked things too many times. And then all of a sudden the horse, it's like saying the same word. If you said because enough times, you're like, what does the word because even mean? It just scrambles your brain. So rest, definitely important for our brain. What would you say are going to be the physical benefits of taking a little break?
Yeah, I think the physical benefits are pretty much what you kind of talked about there in terms of like the consolidation. It's comes down to like those neural pathways being able to establish, and like Dr. Stephen Peters talks about what's happening with the actual neurons, and you got an increase in myelin, which is the outer covering of the neurons, which actually makes the nerve pathway faster. And that myelin builds with when we give it a rest, so we don't actually, the nerve pathway is, like you said, not building through repetitions. It's actually, because it needs extra energy, etc., it's building in that rest time. So what I'd expect physically is that if they've had an adequate amount of rest, that the next day, whatever that exercise was, is like 100% better. Do you know what I mean? Like, you'll see an improvement in that, the horse's ability to execute that exercise. And like you said before, when you just did it once, but the next time the foal knew exactly what to do, it just shows that we don't need to repeat and repeat and repeat. It's that quality over quantity to instill that meaningful neural pathway, which then makes the difference. So then physically you'd expect that one step tomorrow is, they can get it quicker, they can get it easier. It seems like they've done it a million times before. And I have been blown away by that so many times. It's like, even after a bodywork session, I will show a horse maybe a specific way of moving, and then it's like the body can't go back to how it was. It's like, so long as I gave it enough time, and especially if I saw a recognition, so like the horse did do a moment of stillness, a lick and a chew, a yawn, something that showed the nervous system recognized a new pattern, then I can give the horse back to the owner, and the horse recognizes that new, like the horse's body recognizes that new pattern, whereas opposed to the owner trying to teach it and then not recognizing it, and so then the horse doesn't know when they did it, etc. And yeah, it just surprises me how then you've just got progress on top of progress on top of progress. So I think that that's really what I see physically, is that consistent, continued improvement. And it's so obvious. It's not like, was that better than yesterday? It's like, that was definitely a million times better. Yesterday I had to ask 10 times until I got that one. And today, on the first time, because I stopped after that one yesterday, today on the first time I got it. Simple.
Yeah. Yes.
And if that's not happening, then there's a lack of, connection happening there between the teaching or the physical ability to do the exercise.
Definitely. And from that biomechanical perspective, if the horse is concentrating hard or becoming fatigued and we don't recognize those subtle signs, then you can get to the point where you've like you said, you've asked those number of times, and then you get your repetition where there's no brace through the neck or the thoracic sling activates. But if you keep going, and then you get the one where you get your beautiful, beautiful one. You're like, yes, that was amazing. Let's stop there. But if you kept going, you would actually fatigue in the new way of doing things biomechanically. And that's when you move past your optimal state and you go back. And so you overtraining when you're doing that postural or mindful work, your brace through the neck and jaw comes back, or
And you lost all the benefits. Yeah.
Yeah, and so that compensation pattern that you were trying to train out of on a neurological level comes back because you've included fatigue. And so
because it's a stronger pathway.
It's a stronger pathway.
It stays a stronger pathway for a fair while until that new pathway becomes a new pattern of movement.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. So that short pause always makes a difference to prevent the horse from practicing the dysfunctional movement pattern repeatedly again after you've found that good space, because we want to leave them in the best position that we can. How does this build emotional safety for the horse?
Yeah, I think it's so valuable to build emotional safety for the horse. Like, I just see horses get so much more confident, so much more curious, and so much more connected to like their environment and the people and their people. It's like they recognize, oh, you actually see me. Like, you see that I'm trying. You acknowledged that was difficult for me. And they just, it's insane how they changed from that perspective. We're basically kind of telling them this is a safe place, and if you need to stop, it's an option. If you need a break, it's an option. If you need a moment, it's an option. Like, and then they just start to be more willing to engage with you. They start to be more willing to try. They can actually process and breathe without feeling like the pressure's going to just increase. They become more confident, more willing, less defensive, and just overall more engaged and curious in the whole training process. Like, one of the things that I love with my horses is, and I mean, sometimes it's frustrating, but especially with Ellie, but I love that they kind of let me know how they feel about exercises. And the feedback that they give me about any situation. Really, I know when they're anxious about a situation, because they know that they have permission to let me know that. And it's polite. I'm not saying my horses become rude. It's like if Jelly's anxious about something, he will just really start like mouthing me a little bit. And then if I don't listen, like I will get a little nip, which is very rare these days. But then he's saying like, I'm quite anxious in this situation now. I'm not really sure what you want me to do. That's usually what he's saying. Ellie will just be disconnected from me. So she'll just be like doing her own thing, basically. Like, well, I want to go over here and I'm going to go regardless of what you say. And then I know, well, she's not feeling connected and safe, and I don't have her brain in this moment, that she's, just completely external, and there's no internal kind of locus of confidence and learning here. So yeah, when they recognize that, that all improves that window of tolerance that they talk about, like their ability to withstand stresses. And stresses can be just new learnings. It increases, so they're actually able to stay connected and learn for a little bit longer. They're like able to, just try a little bit harder than what they were previously. They're a little bit more balanced, all of those things. And yeah, it's just it's amazing how their like willingness changes when you just recognize like you just
It's like a
need.
level of trust, isn't it?
Yeah, it's like they
Yeah,
trust
I
that you
trust,
listen.
and I trust you're not going to push me too much. I do believe too that a lot of people who, nobody is a perfect trainer, and we're often meeting horses at a point in their life where they already have experiences. And so we are wanting to change their predictions about their experience with the task or their experience with us or people, especially when you're going to ask them about to do something that might be physically challenging, say postural work. I want you to think more about your body. And they're like, wow,
Yeah.
I don't really want to do that. So, we want to change that prediction that they have by saying you can have a break if you want to. So for me, I personally will say yes to nearly any first try, even if it's nearly in the wrong direction, because it means that there is an answer
Trying to
or a
figure it
release. Yeah, they're trying to figure it out, but it's the idea of, for the horse, okay, I would like to work through this pressure to release it, but I also know that that there is a release to be had, because the horse doesn't know in the very beginning, well, you're definitely going to release the pressure at some point. So I like to say, yes, don't forget, at some point, I'm going to let go of, the pressure or my ask, no matter how small it is, there is something available here. And all I want to do is to be able to shape and search until I get the answer that I want. But there is absolutely a release available for you. And I don't want you to think or have an association that this is unrelenting effort or an unrelenting ask, because 99% of the time, you shouldn't be asking the cue. You should be in the release. Otherwise, it's not worth it for the horse to spend 50 or 60% of their time in the queue. You want to be reducing that time that you're asking to as little as possible. And it's interesting, when I'm doing too much, I have to be a better trainer. So
out.
if I have a young horse that is stressed, my timing needs to be impeccable. I need
Yeah.
to be reinforcing at the right moment because a stressed horse learns things and holds on to them for dear life. And so if I make a mistake, I am consolidating a lesson I didn't want to consolidate, whether that is brace, it's backing up, it's turning in the wrong direction. It's kind of that annoying pull the head, pull the lead rope out of my hand when that's such an annoying habit and a hard one
Mm.
to break. So you actually have so much more leeway and grace with the more time that you give them because you're not chancing it with a stressed horse and them trying to learn things in a survival mode, which are harder to undo and harder to change. So, if you just shape something neutral, like, oh, this is what it means when I press on your point of hip, I just want you to step over. It's quite neutral if you're not scared. And then at some point you might be like, actually, I'm going to change this cue and we're going to work on it just in a calm way for a long time. That is going to change so much more than if you're somebody who has flagged the horse as you're
Yeah.
pressing on the hip and they've learned like, oh my God, I have to step, 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 step. So
I don't have
yeah,
time to process this information and to allow
yeah,
my body to get organized before I move it and create balance and stability. I just have to react and move. And so there's just not that ability to, um, like for the nervous system to fully integrate and process what's being asked of them.
yeah, definitely. So, and of course, it's worth recognizing that sometimes the break is the training
Yeah.
because there are some horses that have histories with pain in them. They have anxiety, they've been shut down. Perhaps they have postural instability and it makes them feel very unsafe. So, the
Yeah.
ability to stand calmly, breathe, process the environment, or be regulated may be a huge part of the rehab process. And stillness doesn't necessarily mean inactivity. It's the moment, it can be when the body lets go enough to reorganize itself. And that in itself, just being able to stand still and relax, is the time at which you can evaluate your environment rather than react to it.
Yeah.
So, if there is nothing else that you have to do beyond just relax, then you have time to think. And a thinking horse is one that will look after you, it can look after themselves.
100%.
A thinking horse doesn't step on you accidentally. A thinking horse is aware of their limbs, they're aware of themselves. So that break can really be very valuable. I know you have a couple of horses that where your homework for people has been you need to stand with your horse and just chill, and that's been the biggest change for them.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
one
yeah.
especially that was quite highly strung and yeah, she was like, "Oh, I didn't get to do any of the other exercises, but I did go and stand in the paddock with him a couple of times." And the change from that one session to the next was the biggest change. You know, because he was a horse that was like, "What do you want me to do? What do you want me to do?" Yep. Like he was like a border collie who's like just ready to jump off the cliff for their owner. Like that's how I would describe him. And what we wanted was for him to become a thinking horse, not a reacting horse that was like reacting to whatever she asked, but just like being able to emotionally self-regulate and also knowing that he could just stand and that was enough. And so, yeah, sometimes my homework has been from a rehab perspective. And I had an online consult I just did last week where, the horse, I can't think of his problem right now, but the biggest problem I saw was his level of reactiveness. He's had a neurological condition, and so he's struggling to stabilize himself. And I was like, you actually just need to sit and breathe with him and just let him find emotional regulation in stillness before we move on to adding any further rehab, because she'd done all the stuff, like she'd done all the rehab exercises and nothing was sticking because he was not in his body. Like his whole awareness was like everywhere else. So sometimes that rest just helps the horse to come back into their body, to become present, to actually just sit within that. So Yeah, just recognize that brain breaks and rest are not lost time, and give it a go, because you might be surprised that if you stop and wait for your horse. Like the other one I do is just make people wait for their horse to initiate the movement rather than them always initiating their horse's movement or them always telling their horse when to stop. It's like, wait for your horse to initiate movement, and wait for your horse to initiate their stop, because giving them back that agency, or whatever you want to call it, like giving them back that level of control over their body, it changes everything for them. And they will actually learn much, much better. Like your training will be way more effective. So do you have any kind of takeaways?
Yeah, that if you're not sure, the answer is generally to try doing or asking less. And so when you think, am I doing too much? Often you are. And it's about recognizing, when learning is occurring, the nervous system might need support and when your horse needs space to process. And so there are lots of questions you can ask yourself, just say, are they still present? Are we getting improvement or are we starting to deteriorate in this session and it's gone a bit longer? So, just being able to say, just thoughtfully, does my horse need more input or time to process? And what would happen if I pause here? So giving yourself a moment. And, if you are scared to not be doing something super efficiently or doing it perfect, that in itself is something to ask yourself about, because the 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 reduction in pressure, your horse can feel it. So if you are putting pressure on yourself to do things perfectly and get them done, your horse feels that. So sometimes a bit of self-grace and forgiveness will probably pay off, allowing yourself both to just chill out.
Yeah. And I would say just break down any task that your horse is finding complex, and then reward, like you said earlier, the smaller try, so they start to recognize that you're recognizing them, and allow those rest periods in between. You will learn to know how long they need to be, because there is a difference, when the horses goes into a rest place, they often go a bit internal, and when they come out of it again, they're kind of like back to being aware of their environment, back to, kind of like, okay, what are we doing now? As opposed to them just kind of standing there going quite still within themselves. So, it's something that you just have to practice and give a go. And I think sometimes the hardest thing for people too is to don't touch your horse in those moments. Like, just let them process it. Don't be patting them. Don't you interact with them in those moments. Like, let them truly have that moment of rest with you in their presence. That's also a really important part of their break. It's not about you, and it's not about you touching them. It's actually about them regulating their own nervous
Their
system.
own stuff.
Yeah.
You're just making me think of one time, Overfly, a horse that I used to have. He would love to process by himself. And I remember being out there. This is something that will stay with me forever, actually. I remember doing some work with him and then taking the halter off and taking a step back. And he was processing. And I thought to myself, you like to process without being touched. But I wanted to do one last little thing, and I wanted to do something. And so I came in and I had this thought of like, he doesn't like to be touched while he's processing. He just wants to be on himself. And he just gave me the biggest, as I went to step in and touch him, he just turned, didn't step or move, ears back, and just glared at me like, you knew that I didn't want to be touched right now. Like, you have to step back and give me my space. And he was a real sweetie.
Yeah,
So
it was
that
not
will
like
stick
the
with you for
horse.
everywhere. It was like, you knew, I told you, you know how I feel about that. Like, back off. And I was like, oh, sorry. Okay. I'll take a step back. But Yeah, it's and they'll, like you
Space.
said, they'll tell you, and giving the space, it's respectful.
Create a conversation and a partnership rather than a dictation. And it's amazing what can change.
Yeah.
So thank you for joining myself, Dr. Raquel Butler and Sophie Vandenberg in today's podcast. Enjoy your horse time. Please subscribe to the Equine Functional Posture podcast so you don't miss our weekly episodes, and give us a 5-star rating and follow us so that we can share more valuable insights. Reach out with any listener requests for topics that you'd like to hear us talk about. And if you're a business aligned with our mission, reach out to become a sponsor of the podcast.
And we'll see you in the next exciting episode.